Okay, guys, so I had to cut this lecture into two because I tried to embed those videos and it just effed everything up. So the end of the last video is probably all fudged up, but it's okay. We're learning as we are going. Well, I am. So really quickly, the Lazar ecosystem, I covered the palm oil issues with that. If you wanted to see a little bit more closely where it's located, here it is. And just notice, I mean, this is from 2008. It's a long time ago, right? But 1985 to 2009, the red is how much natural forest has been lost within those years between 85 and 2009. So, there's kind of these two factors going on there. Number one, they are removing the natural rainforest, and trees sequester carbon. They help clean our air. And number two, not only are they removing them, but they're burning them. So as they're burning them, all that carbon that has been stored within those trees for all those years is being released along with the ashes, right? So it's not only a greenhouse gas emission, but it's like twice that because all that carbon that has been stored within those trees. Okay, let's talk about native species versus invasive species. And the next couple slides are going to be specifically on plants. Why is it so important? What's the big deal about native species? So these plants, they will harbor and provide a home for unique and native wildlife. So it starts with the plants first, and then you bring in all the natural animals and insects that live within the area. So if you know anyone that has a native garden in their front yard, about 5 years ago, it was really popular to remove your grass and then exchange it for that native plant garden, which to a lot of people might look just like brushes. But remember, we live in the chaparral, right? That's what we are here. We're short, drought-resistant brushes that decorate our landscape. So instead of having those, very water-intensive lawns, it was removed and replaced. Those were removed and replaced with these native plants. And then once you have those native plants, right, maybe a manzanita tree, maybe sage, maybe lavender, whatever the case is, then you start to have all those insects, bees, and then birds, and then all the wildlife comes in. So native plants are very important. A native species is a plant that is native and occurs naturally or has existed for many years. So, I mean, we have about 1,500 just in the chaparral, different plant species, right? So over 3,500 in the California floristic province. So I can't give you all of them. I'm going to show you just some really popular ones. These are oak trees, coast live oaks. Coast live oak trees, are what decorates and covers our landscape here, especially in those Santa Monica Mountains. This is sage, so we've talked about sage already. This is a manzanita tree. We find a similar kind in the, oh sorry, that was my speaker. In the Australian chaparral. This here is a Jeffrey pine, one of the only pine trees native to Southern California. And then this guy right here is a Joshua tree. So you guys have seen those. Maybe you've been out there. Now let's look at invasives. So, actually I did want to talk about palm trees. You'll notice there are no palm trees in those native species to California. And palm trees seem to be like the iconic tree, right? It's on our license plates. I mean, when people think of Los Angeles and California, and they think of palm trees, right? And they're not native to California. The iconic palm trees that people tend to think about are these king palm trees. They're native in Australia. There's 5 different types, but they grow really well here. And they're not invasive because they're not outcrowding or taking over natural vegetation or posing any threats. They just grow really, really well here in California, and I think that we take them as our own, right? They're California palm trees almost, and they're really expensive actually. So I don't know if you're into landscaping at all. I hear that they're very expensive. The only California palm tree that is native to California is this California Washingtonia. That's it. This is the only native palm tree, and that's not like that iconic palm tree, right? Invasive species, on the other hand, is different. Not only is it non-native, so you can have a non-native plant that'll grow well here, but it doesn't pose a threat. It doesn't have a negative impact on the environment. That is the difference. An invasive species is obviously not native and has a negative impact or effect on the environment. It'll outcrowd vegetation. It will not allow erosion to happen naturally. It will block rivers and waterways. It will harbor and create nests for rodents, or for rodents, and take over that natural vegetation. So that is the key difference between a native and non-native. And invasive. Invasive has to have a negative impact. So a couple examples are ice plant. This here is ice plant, and it looks really familiar. It was brought over from Africa. It grows really well here. Some people might not even know that it's invasive, but it grows so well that especially along these beach ecosystems, it doesn't allow for the natural erosion that these beach areas and shore areas need. This right here is a Mexican fan palm. So this tree is highly invasive. I mean, they're all invasive. I don't know if you can say one is highly or not. This right here is yellow star thistle. And this is a rhododendron, which grows wildly, almost like wildfire, along riparian ecosystems. Do you guys remember what riparian means? Who remembers? River ecosystems. Good. See, I miss you guys. So, why do we need organisms? Why is it important to protect these plants and animals? The romantic side of it, right, is because it's our duty. We're called to be good stewards because they're beautiful. That's like the flowery, romantic side of conservation, which is a main reason, right, because it's important. But there's also these benefits that ecosystems provide to us. We talked about ecosystem services, and unfortunately in this day and age, we have to kind of tie a monetary or personal benefit or social benefit to conservation. Otherwise, people tend not to care, right? If we present it as, oh, like if you save this park, you are going to save thousands of dollars in healthcare because it helps asthma, or I don't know, different things like that, right? Now people start to listen, and now you can implement that to in public policy, because things, unfortunately, money talks, right? Why do we need organisms? Again, ecosystem services and species richness. Right? The activities of all organisms, they're interrelated. If you take one thing out of the web, the entire web will collapse, right? Species richness within an ecosystem, it provides the ecosystem with resilience. So it ensures that this ecosystem will survive if all those species are there. Genetic reserves, the maintenance of a broad genetic base is critical for a species' long-term health and survival. If there's just kind of the sameness or genetic uniformity, it increases susceptibility to pests and disease. So if there's only one type of grasshopper, right, it's gonna be more prone to a disease, and if that disease happens to take them all out, there's not going to be any more grasshoppers. Right? So, and that's just a very small scale example. Scientific importance of genetic diversity, like I said, you need to have more than one type of species, but it's also important for scientists. Genetic engineering makes it possible to use all those genetic resources on a wide scale, to create more medicines, to create more food, and we'll talk about that later. It has taken hundreds of millions of years for evolution to produce the genetic diversity that we find today in organisms, and we can't just take that away in our lifetime. In our lifetime, we will take away millions and hundreds of millions of years for evolution. That evolution took to produce this, genetic richness. Aesthetic, ethical, and spiritual value, that's like the beautiful side of it, right? Like, because we should protect it, because it's our duty. Yeah, you're correct. There's this spiritual, aesthetic, ethical value tied to biodiversity. This picture here is a rosy periwinkle, because another reason is medicinal, right? It's not up here, but medicinal, agricultural, and industrial importance of organisms. Oh, it is up there. Sorry, guys. Pharmaceutical industry. Chemicals are derived from organisms. Cherry extracts, they help for anti-cancer or antiviral drugs. Products taken from marine organisms like red algae, mollusks, corals, and sponges. AZT, for example, is derived from a sponge. And if anybody knows, AZT is one of the main drugs used for AIDS patients. So for a long time, that was a huge issue. But AZT has helped in the longevity of those patients. Certain beetles create steroids with birth control potentials. Fireflies produce a compound that is useful in treating viral infections. So, right now for the virus that's going around, or future viruses or pandemics, hopefully we don't have anymore, but a lot of those medicines can be found in nature, right? Sorry, guys. Okay, let's keep. Extinction and species endangerment. So when we talk about species becoming extinct, obviously that animal is not coming back. It is an irreversible loss. They will never reappear. A mass extinction is what we're experiencing today. It's a numerous amount of species disappearing during a relatively short period of time. Today, in our lifetime, because of humans, we are living through the 6th mass extinction. So there's been 5, right? One that we know very famously took out the dinosaurs, but there's been others, right? There's been 4 more, and most of those has been tied to catastrophic events or an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but natural increases of carbon dioxide. Today we cannot say that it has been natural sources that have increased carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It is directly the hand of man. Yes, there are natural causes, right, of those greenhouse gases, but we kind of have our hand on the throttle, right, and we're pushing everything to extinction, to the brink, right? So we're living through the 6th mass extinction, and it is called the Anthropocene. I am going to assign a movie this week, a documentary called Racing Extinction, and it has to do everything with species loss and the 6th mass extinction, which is called the Anthropocene. So you will see a lot of this on that movie this week. I'll give you guys a couple weeks to do that. It is a fantastic movie. I love watching it. So if you guys want to have your family that you're living with or whoever you're living with watch it, I suggest you do that. I promise I'm not going to assign anything boring at all. Sharks, manta rays, crabs, tree frog, those are all animals that we will look at and that the movie will. For instance, the Rab's tree frog, when I started teaching this lecture, one was left, but now it is extinct. Frogs are very susceptible to extinction, and the numbers are outstanding. The way that these amphibians are disappearing, because they're more prone to environmental changes because their skin is so sensitive. They're known as an indicator species. So if you see the amphibians within an ecosystem dying off, then there's something absolutely wrong within that ecosystem or the environment. The West African black rhino, we lost the last one in 2011. The golden toad, look at that. Isn't that pretty awesome? Looks like you can lick it and get like super high or something. 1989, the Spix macaw in 2004. Here is kind of like some good news, right? Because this is not seen often in biology, in conservation, is the animal being saved or coming off the endangered list, right? But you know, something so large and iconic like a panda, it's really easy to get the attention that this animal needs. But there's like small species out there that are endangered or will go extinct and nobody will ever know, like a small brown bird or a grasshopper or something so tiny that is not ever going to get the attention that it deserves. But something like the giant panda will, right? And it's so interesting the way they, I don't know if you guys have seen videos of Chinese biologists. They dress up in actual panda suits and they went out to help them kind of start breeding again. And this is a good news, right? It made it off the endangered list. It's not endangered anymore. A reason for their endangerment was because they have a very specific diet. So what is something that they eat? The only thing they eat is bamboo. Good. So that is a huge factor. When an animal is going extinct or is endangered, if they have a very specialized diet, it is, I don't want to say it's for sure, but it is more prone to becoming endangered, threatened, or extinct. The Palos Verdes blue butterfly, or the PV blue butterfly, something so tiny like this, and it has a very specific habitat. This was on the endangered list. It made a comeback in the 1990s because of California's drought. However, in the recent 2-3 years, it hasn't been cited, but it's very localized to San Pedro and Palos Verdes because it lives specifically where you find loco weed or deer weed, so only within that region. So something that has very, very localized habitat is also susceptible to becoming endangered, hopefully not extinct. But again, like this, a tiny blue butterfly, it doesn't seem to get the attention that it deserves, right? So there is this really amazing photographer, Joel Sartore, and he took it upon himself to document he tried to document almost every animal on Earth. It's called the Photo Ark, right? Kind of like Noah's Ark, just to highlight and give attention to these beautiful animals. And he did an amazing job. We have the Florida panther here, which is slowly declining, very closely related to the California mountain lion. It is a type of puma, only found in the Everglades. I think there's like, I want to say 60 of them left. Florida panther population. In 2015, there was about 100 of them left. So how many Florida panthers are there left? 120 to 130 panthers left in the wild. So very small amount, right? This guy, I totally forgot the name of him, but everybody says that there is this show that he looks like, I don't know, I'm too old for that. This is a quetzal, and this is here my favorite, those orangutans that are critically endangered species currently. Very, very sad. The next slide, I do have to warn you, is tough to look at, so I would forward a few minutes. It has very horrible pictures, but we do have to talk about the exotic and illegal trade. Oh, never mind. Just kidding. Sorry. Characteristics of endangered species. I was kind of talking about this when we looked at those different pictures of endangered species. A few reasons, or reasons that will lead to endangerment of an animal. Number one, not in any specific order, would be for this species to have small localized ranges, like that blue butterfly, right? Very tiny location that it's found. And if that location were to be overtaken by development or urbanization, then we would lose that species. Or on the flip side, requiring a large territory. So something like an a rhino needs an African rhino would need large territory, right? So that's gonna, um, put a stress on the population of that species. Living on islands, habitat fragmentation. So we see this a lot with urbanization and development. The way that buildings are built and new tracts are developed, it just kind of breaks up these natural habitats into small pieces. Low reproductive success. So maybe they only have one baby per year, or their litter is very, very small. Needing specialized breeding areas or having specialized feeding habitats like the panda, for example. Okay, so here is that horrible picture. I'm sorry I didn't warn you correctly. The exotic and endangered animal trade. The reason I have these pictures up here is because it's important for people to understand the way that these animals are poached. Most people don't understand that these animals are not killed nicely to take their ivory, tusk, fur, or whatever. And this tiger here, many believe that eating meat from these animals is healthier or better, like tiger bones and tiger meat is sold for weakness. And this trade in a lot of places is thriving. This is the fourth most lucrative illegal trade in the world. So it could be for many reasons. It could be for poaching. That's when you take a product from an animal, like the tusk, bones, paw, horn, fur, ivory, whatever. Or a lot of times you have exotic pets. And I had this lecture and I used to show this video very much related to that stupid documentary that's out right now, the Exotic Joe documentary, which I watched, but I was not as amazed as most people on the internet are, because it's disgusting, right? The way these animals are kept in cages, and there is no way that they can argue and say that it is a sanctuary for these animals, because it's not. So what I was trying to get at, that even before this documentary came out, I would talk about how there are more big cats in United States backyards as pets than there are in the wild. So, a lot of times it's the it factor. People just want to have the last, the last piranha, the last lizard of this type that someone might not even know is the last of its type, because it's bragging rights, or for consumption. These are different reasons that the endangered animal or the exotic animal trade is so lucrative. So I think that's it for the topic. Okay, so let's look at indicator species. I did talk about that a little bit earlier when we looked at the golden toad. So amphibians are indicator species. Amphibians represent 6,400 different types of frogs and toads and salamanders. What an indicator species does, it provides an early warning of environmental damage with potential to affect other species. So first it's those amphibians that are affected, and then the rest of the ecosystem would be, is going to show signs of stress or damage. They are very sensitive to environmental indicators in both aquatic and terrestrial systems. That's why they are so important, because not only are they in terrestrial systems, ecosystems, but also aquatic. The frog population has been dwindling since the 1970s for many different reasons: habitat loss, pollutants, infectious diseases, climate change, agricultural chemicals, pesticides, and those pesticides, they do build up within the ecosystem, and you'll see things like a three-legged frog or whatever the case is, agricultural chemicals, deformities in frogs because of those pesticides, extra toes, legs, but those animals cannot reproduce. They usually die before they reproduce, unfortunately. Right now we are seeing a dwindling amount of a dwindling population of frogs because of a certain fungus called the chytrid fungus. They have been seeing, especially in South America, parts of Panama, because of climate change, these high temperatures have increased evaporation. So there's more clouds, which during the day blocks sunlight and keeps temperatures warmer at night, which increases the amount of chytrid fungus. So chytrid fungus is threatening all frog species, especially in South American countries, and it is causing a global amphibian mass extinction. Conservation biology. So this is the scientific study of how humans impact organisms and the development of ways to protect biological diversity. This is how we cope with declining biological diversity. It ranges from processes that influence decline to protecting these species and restoring the populations of these endangered species. So if it's something that you are very interested in, I would suggest getting into conservation biology. And it's, very broad. You can be in the field taking samples of water, taking frogs and putting them in labs and controlling those environments, or it could be, in a lab where you're testing the blood of a certain animal. I don't know, so many places to find your career within this discipline. Challenges with conservation management. The human knowledge of ecosystems is limited. More scientific data is needed to make more decisions. I mean, you guys can look at this. So there's a lot of different reasons, right? Connecting fragmented habitats. So when we talk about conservation, it's important to look at solutions, right? And I know this class, you have a lot of doom and gloom, but here's like a silver lining. There are solutions to this. We are trying to implement both the natural and the urban world. So here we have these wildlife corridors or ecoducts. They're called different things in different places. But because of habitat fragmentation, there has to be a way for these animals to get to and from disturbed, because it could be migration, it could be for food, it could be for breeding, but it is very important for these animals to have as little contact as possible. So with these habitat corridors, it allows wild organisms to move from one fragmented habitat to another, and they can mate and feed and recolonize habitats. Really cool, right? Restoring damaged or destroyed habitats. Restoration ecology is the study of historical conditions of a human damaged ecosystem with the goal to return it to as close as possible. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of money or time being put into these projects, but it is important to preserve these habitats, right? Because once you have these habitats, then comes in all that wildlife. We also have to reclaim disturbed land and convert them into areas with high biological diversity. The restoration of disturbed lands creates biological habitats and has huge benefits like the regeneration of soil, which is usually damaged by agriculture or mining. Aquaria, botanical gardens, and seed banks. What is your opinion on zoos? People have different opinion on zoos, and it really depends on the zoo, right? Something like Joe Exotic's zoo, and I hate that I'm using him as an example, is not a zoo that I would condone, right? It's not a place that you can say, oh, well, humans are going and they're educating themselves. No. A place maybe like San Diego Wildlife Park. That is where you have scientists and biologists actually working with these animals and giving them the best life possible. But I think education for kids and adults alike and visiting well-established zoos, I think, is important. But a place like SeaWorld, to me, is not enough. That is a show right? It's kind of like a circus. So that's my opinion on zoos, because I get asked that a lot. You just really have to be careful where you're going and where you're giving your money, what you're giving your money to. Zoos, like aquariums and botanical gardens, they play a critical role in saving individual species on the brink of extinction. So a lot of times there are animals that are endangered in the wild or extinct in the wild and only found in zoos or aquariums. So that's why zoos are okay. It's just a very fine line, right, when we talk about zoos. This is the place where they help in the regeneration of this species with either embryo transfer, artificial insemination, and then the next step in that would be to reintroduce that saved endangered species. And that also is not easy. You can repopulate an endangered species, the population can grow, but it is not easy to reintroduce an animal into the wild. The success rate of that is 1 in 10. So 10%, only 10% of a reintroduction, 1 in 10 is successful. That's not very high, right? But the main goal of these captive breeding programs is to reintroduce them to the wild where they belong. That's the main goal, even if it's not so easy. Seeds, more than 100 seed banks around the world exist. This is the most famous one, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, inside a remote island in the Svalbard archipelago, and this is in Norway, close to Norway. So very, very high in terms of latitude, very, very cold, where you have something called permafrost, which is permanently frozen subsoil. So underground, you have very cold temperatures along with this refrigerated system. You have all the countries around the world who send their seeds to this seed bank. So in case of any sort of catastrophe, you can start to grow crops again. I mean, it's kind of like this doomsday vault, right? Because we are preparing for some type of apocalypse. Hopefully not. I feel like we're living it today, but we are preparing for something, right? You know, and you might have your seed saved there, but that does not mean that that seed will grow. So there's a lot of reasons that we are saving our seeds. It could be because of climate change. It could be we're keeping it safe from habitat destruction. It's just kind of like this library of all our seeds. There have been some instances of using seeds from seed banks to reintroduce a plant species that has become extinct, but there are disadvantages to these seed vaults. The plant that is stored can remain stagnant and not respond to evolutionary change. So they don't respond to changes happening in the environment, like climate warming or different aerosols in the environment, and they may not be able to grow once you take that seed out of the seed bank. They might be less fit for survival when they are reintroduced. So pretty interesting. There's a whole lot of videos on these. I can't show you them here, but if you go through the slides yourselves, you can watch them. They're pretty cool. A couple more slides, guys. Let's see, give me a second.